You know, in World War II, victory was bought with something one historian called a currency of corpses. But this wasn't about heroic duels on the battlefield. Not at all. This was about industrial-scale destruction, and it was engineered by men who completely transformed what it meant to be an American general, turning them from field commanders into, well, CEOs of annihilation. 3.5 million. Let that sink in for a second. That's roughly how many enemy soldiers were killed by the forces under just 5 American commanders. We're not talking wounded or captured, we're talking killed. This is the story of how they did it, and what it really cost. And this quote, wow, it really gets to the heart of the American war effort, doesn't it? The goal wasn't just to outmaneuver the enemy anymore, it was to completely overwhelm them with a terrifyingly simple equation, the application of superior mass. It was brutal, it was mathematical, and honestly, it was devastatingly effective.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Who was America's most lethal general? But as you're about to see, the answer isn't just a name you can point to. The very idea of lethality got redefined during the war, and it was measured in different and equally grim ways.
It's kind of crazy to think about, but before Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Army was actually smaller than Portugal's. But that attack, well, it unlocked the single greatest industrial mobilization in human history. All of a sudden, American generals had the keys to an economy that could pump out 6 million tons of bombs. The new doctrine was clear: expend steel, not flesh. So when we ask that question, who was the most lethal? A few names probably pop into your head right away. These are the legends, the aggressive, larger-than-life battlefield commanders we all know from the movies and the history books. And first on that list, of course, is George S. Patton. He was the living embodiment of American aggression. While other generals were busy plotting these careful, methodical advances, Patton weaponized chaos. His philosophy was brutally simple: hold the enemy by the nose and kick him in the pants. His brand of lethality was all about pure, relentless speed. And this is where you see the stark reality of his command. Patton's Third Army inflicted a staggering 1.4 million casualties on the Germans. That's a spectacular 9-to-1 kill ratio. Think about that. For every American soldier lost, 9 enemy soldiers were killed. But it came at a huge price. His army also suffered the highest American casualties of any army in Europe. He won, no doubt, but that victory was paid for in American blood. Now, let's jump over to the Pacific, where we find a completely different style of lethality. Where Patton was all about kinetic force and raw aggression, General Douglas MacArthur was all about strategic efficiency. He pioneered a kind of annihilation that was maybe slower, but every bit as total. See, MacArthur had this brilliant insight: capturing every single fortified island was a deadly waste of men and material. So instead, he'd bypass the Japanese strongholds, grab the vital airfields and ports around them, and just cut their supply lines. More than 250,000 Japanese soldiers were left stranded, to wither on the vine and die from disease and starvation, completely irrelevant to the war. It was brutal, for sure, but it was undeniably effective at keeping American casualties down. But here's the thing: lethality wasn't just about the charismatic legends on the front lines. Some of the highest body counts belonged to the guys who wielded war like a massive, systematic process of just methodical destruction. 1 million. That's the number of enemy soldiers that General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group either killed or captured. That's more than any other American commander in Europe, more than Patton, more than even Eisenhower. If Patton was the rapier, all flash and speed, then Bradley was the sledgehammer. The Germans actually called his operational style clockwork because his attacks were so precise, so methodical, and so relentlessly efficient. He didn't rely on a single stroke of genius, he just ground the German army into dust under the crushing weight of an industrial anvil. So you have to ask, where did this incredible war machine even come from? Well, the answer lies with a general you've probably never heard of, Leslie J. McNair. He's often called the unsung architect, the guy who took a tiny, underfunded force and built it into the logically organized, well-trained army that would go on to win the war. And you can really see how lethality became a system. McNair builds the machine. Eisenhower, as a supreme commander, points that machine in the right direction with his broad front strategy. And then guys like Bradley are on the ground, executing that strategy with overwhelming, methodical force. It was literally a production line of victory. But there was another level to this story, a much darker, more terrifying evolution of lethality, one that pretty much erased the line between soldier and civilian, between a battle and just total annihilation. Okay, so picture this. It's late 1944. The American B-29 Superfortress, the single most expensive weapon of the entire war, was failing. The whole strategy of high-altitude precision bombing just wasn't working. But it wasn't being defeated by enemy fighters. It was being beaten by an invisible force of nature. That enemy was the jet stream. These incredibly powerful, high-altitude winds were literally blowing bombs miles off target, leaving Japan's war industry almost completely untouched. It was looking more and more like a ground invasion, with a projected 1 million American casualties was going to be the only option. And that's when General Curtis LeMay steps in. LeMay saw war as an engineering problem, and his solution was, well, it was radical and absolutely terrifying. He ordered his B-29s to completely abandon precision bombing. Instead, they would fly low, at just 5,000 feet and at night. He had them stripped of their defensive guns to pack in more bombs. And they weren't high-explosive bombs. They were incendiaries, specifically designed to create a firestorm in Japan's Wooden City. On the night of March 10, 1945, the result was Operation Meeting House. It created a man-made weather event, a literal firestorm that incinerated 16 square miles of Tokyo. An estimated 100,000 people, almost all of them civilians, were killed in a single night. To this day, it remains the single deadliest air raid in human history. And LeMay himself, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was brutally honest about it. He understood that the line between a brilliant military strategist and a mass murderer is often just drawn by the person who wins the war. So after looking at all these different faces of lethality, from the chaotic battlefields to the methodical bureaucracy, all the way to the skies over Tokyo, let's go back to our original question. Who was the most lethal?
Well, as this scorecard kind of shows, the answer really just depends on how you define the word. If lethality is pure aggression and battlefield momentum, it's got to be Patton. If it's about efficiency, that kill-to-loss ratio, then it's MacArthur. For just sheer volume, the total number of enemy casualties, it's Bradley. And for total, unsparing annihilation, it's Curtis LeMay. And you know, the one man who commanded this whole terrifying machine, Dwight Eisenhower, he saw the danger in what they'd created. In his farewell address, he famously warned America about the military-industrial complex, recognizing that the very thing they built to defeat fascism had become a permanent part of American life. The sleeping giant, as they said, would never truly sleep again.
In the end, these men were the products of a world that was literally on fire. To save that world, they had to be willing to break it. And that leaves us with a really difficult question to chew on. To win a total war, they had to become more lethal than the enemy. But what is the permanent legacy of that choice?